Hello everybody. Today I'm having a little talk about German wines because it's actually a very interesting topic. There is so much quality being made in Germany, but it can actually be also a bewildering maze of very strange terms. And so, well, in future reviews I think I will do a few tastings of some of the interesting German wines. But before that I think it would be good to do a kind of a tutorial. For example, here you see Cabinet Feinherb on the wine. What does that mean? It is, by the way, a wine of a legendary good winemaker, Karl von Schubert in the Mosel region. And here you see also, for example, Predikaatswine. What does that mean? That kind of thing. So it's very typical for German wines that they have this kind of complex terminology which can really confuse the average buyer, and actually even in Germany, because they are also working these days at a simpler kind of terminology. Now, let's see. I actually made a few notes, so that's easier actually to follow for everybody. If you're going to investigate German wine, I would recommend these are the two labels you have to, already make a selection: Kwaliteitswine, quality wine, or the next one is Kwaliteitswijn met predicaat, means certified quality wine. It does not guarantee these terms that you will like the taste. It simply means that there has been a kind of an audit according to very objective terms, like what is the residual sweetness, has sugar been added or not during the winemaking, how do all the grapes come from one vineyard, that kind of stuff. So it's a very technical kind of label. Now it must be said that the really good ones have almost always one of these two terms. So now about that word cabinet that you just saw. Well, actually there is a full series of I have to juggle a bit. A full series of terms that designate actually the ripeness. If it doesn't say anything, then it's typically table wine. You could say that with quality wines they always begin with cabinet, which means nicely ripe grapes were picked, and then it goes on and on. Namely, Spätlese means it's a late harvest. Doesn't have to be a very sweet one. It's a really very ripe grapes that have been picked. Auslese is really, it's even later, and it's selected very ripe grapes. Beerenauslese, from here on, from Auslese already onwards, the wines get sweeter and sweeter. I will explain that. Beerenauslese means the grapes are really overripe, a bit like the rotting you could have in a Sauterne, but I mean it's a good kind of rot, but in very ripe grapes. An ice wine is wine, the grapes have been picked during the night of the first frost and then gently pressed. Why do they do that? Well, actually the water has become ice and it's more the residual very sweet goodness that oozes out of the grapes, and then they make this incredibly complex dessert wine, ice wine with it. If an ice wine is cheap, it cannot be good. That is something you have to remember, because sometimes on an industrial level what is done, and not just, I'm not talking about Germany, but some of the very cheap ones, actually they just put grapes in a freezer. No, that is not the good stuff. Here we're talking about the quality wines. And then Trockenbeeren Auslese is the ultimate step. Then the grape has really shriveled to a raisin. A dry, Trockenbeeren, dry kind of grape, so there's almost no resulting liquid that comes from it, and the bit that comes from it, the drops that come from it, are extremely sweet. Now actually, if it's well done, they are at the same time sweet and sour, these grapes. These wines, so that even these dessert wines should not be cloying. It should be still elegant and going well with, for example, a blue cheese. Now, about how do you know when you have a dry wine and so on? Well, if it says trocken, that means it's a dry wine. A step sweeter is halbtrocken, which is semi-sweet, and then still a bit sweeter is called fine herb, so I call it semi-sweeter. Well, it's not the best English, but it's not yet completely sweet. I mean, these have still enough acidity. And these wines, if you see Halbtrocken or fine herb, well, if you like Asian food, they go very well with Asian food. Trust me on that. It goes better than almost any other kind of wine. Lieblich, or if nothing, simply nothing, then you know that you've got a sweet wine. You see, this is quite a complex kind of categorization. That's why actually these days actually some newer wine labels, when it says classic in Germany, it's kind of a dry cabinet, and selection, the higher quality, is like a dry spätlese, roughly speaking, so which is more easy to understand for the general consumer. But once you get the hang of it, this goes pretty well. So here you can see this wine is a cabinet fine herb, so it is nicely ripe grapes. It's a good quality wine, but it's not. It's still typically cabinets are nicely light to drink, by the way, and fine herb it's semi-sweet, and it's a predicats wine, which actually means quality wine with certified. So you know technically it's really good. So cabinets can be, and spätleses can be dry, semi-sweet, or sweet, and typically the more you go towards the bottom, there is more and more sugar actually, which it depends actually if you in these in the juice, if in these first two steps you can still ferment almost all the sugar to alcohol, while if you would do that with an auslese, you can actually, because the grapes are so very ripe, if you would convert them all to alcohol, you would get an unbalanced, very strong wine, which is simply not elegant. You don't want that. That's why from here on, the ausleses are normally at least fine herb or Halbtrocken. While the top two ones can be also bone dry or sweeter. And the bottom ones are only sweeter. So actually with the bottom ones, because there's still enough sugar left, it's not a complete fermentation, they typically are less strong in alcohol. Let's have a look here. This one is also one of the really good ones, Karthauser of Berg. Also from the Mosel region. Well, this is here an auslese. Well, I don't know if it focuses well. An auslese, so a very late selected picking of the grapes. There's nothing written. That means it's sweet. And the alcohol content, I see it somewhere, is 8.5%. It's really very little because there's still so much sweetness. Very, very good with the Roquefort cheese, this kind of sweet wine. Now, because my time is getting shorter, a bit about the grapes. Well, of course, Riesling is white wines I think is where Germany is most important, and Riesling is the unbeatable grape. You can find Rieslings from all over the world, and it's fun to compare because in warmer climates they can be quite extravagant tasting. Even you would be surprised, a bit of a petroleum kind of note, and that seems very bad, but it's actually pretty good when you find it in a sun-rich area in Australia when they make that. It can be very different, but in Germany they are typically very elegant and superb wines actually. Now, a lot of other terminology on the grapes. Well, you just have to know that Weissburgunder is Pinot Blanc, Grauburgunder is Pinot Gris, and then there are a few other white grapes next to. Well, you can find Sauvignon Blanc, you can find Chardonnay, but here let's have a look at the more typical ones. Müller-Thurgau is also called Rivaner. It's it's a white wine grape. But I prefer actually Riesling, somewhere in the style of Riesling, somewhat different. I think it's a bit less complex. Sylvaner is typically for sweet wines and simple wines. Gewürztraminer you also find often in France, in the Alsace region, which is not so far from the Mosel region in Germany, is very aromatic. And then there is the Schörebe grape, which is usually sweet, which also has quite a bit of character. For me, actually, my favorite of the real original ones is Riesling, but they also do interesting other things. Now, when we look at the red ones, well, the red ones, very important in Germany since a few years is Dornfelder. Actually, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it's a cross actually of of a few grapes, and then, well, they created actually the Dornfelder, which is a red grape that can handle the cooler climate well. It ripens quickly, and it has a very soft, round taste. Actually, I prefer actually the peppery Shiraz, etc. when I'm talking about red wines, but Dornfelder is very drinkable. It's always drinkable. When you see, by the way, Spätburgunder, it's a Pinot Noir, and you find also things like Cabernet Sauvignon, etc., with sometimes really good results. So I'm almost over here actually. Here you see, by the way, one of the new labels actually. It's Weissburgunder, a Pinot Noir. There's not much written on it. It's a kwaliteitswine simply, but it's one of the more modern labels that you can also find. Well, I hope you found this interesting as an introduction to understanding German wines, and we will revisit them with some tasting notes. Feel free to leave feedback.